Hello students, I want to go through another way. So if you look at it, we've solved by factoring, which is what we did in our last module. Then we solved by taking the square root. Now we're going to solve by completing the squares. Completing the square I want to show you now because it allows us to solve by using a quadratic equation, which unfortunately we're not going to get to by the end of the year. So I want to go through this. But in the future, like when you get to Algebra 2, you're going to see completing the square show up. And so I want to show it to you now so you get a little practice now. So that way, when we come to it in Algebra 2, it's something that hopefully you remember fogly as we go through it. So to complete the square, we first want to get our x squared term by itself. So we don't want to have any other number. So we don't want a 2 or 4 or 8 or anything like that. Next, once we do that, we want to transform this okay, into b over x and then b over 2. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to get x squared by itself, and then we're going to take this term, divide it by 2, and then square it. The middle term, this middle number, divide by 2 and then square it, and then we're going to factor. So it says complete the square to form a perfect square trinomial. So all we want to do is get a perfect square trinomial, which if you remember, we need to get a perfect square here. That's x times x. And now we need a perfect square here. So in order to do that, we need to make sure this first number, okay, we're just going to have it as a 1, so we're good. Then we're going to take the middle number, 4, divided by 2, and then square it. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4. So we're going to add 4 here. And now this is a perfect square trinomial. X times x, this is 2 times 2. And then if you remember, 2 times x is 2x times 2 gives me 4. So this is a perfect square trinomial. So this right here is my answer. Now it's a perfect square trinomial. Same thing, we want this first number to be 1. We're good. We're going to take that middle number, 8. We're going to divide it by 2, and then we're going to square it. So negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4 squared. Negative 4 squared is 16. So we're going to add 16 here. Again, this would be a perfect square. This is x times x. This is 4 times 4. So 4 times x is 4x times 2, so that's 8x, which is what we want to be. Now, we're going to go ahead and solve by completing the square. So this first part, we just complete the square. Again, this is my answer if I just want to complete it. Now we're going to solve by completing the square. So we're going to complete the square, and then we're going to solve by taking the square root, what we did in our previous lesson. So first thing we want to do is make sure our first number is 1, which we're good. This side, we're not going to worry about this right-hand side. So I'm just looking at x squared minus 4x. So my first number is 1, so we're good there. Then we're going to take the middle number, divide it by 2. And then we're going to square it. So that's negative 2 squared, which is 4. So now we're going to add 4 to both sides of the equation. So we come in here, add 4 equals 3 plus 4. So what I do to one side, I do to the other side. And now we're going to factor. This factor will always be x, okay, whatever that sign is, in this case minus, and then this right here, our b value divided by 2. So minus 2, so squared. It will always be that way. It will always be your b value divided by 2 equals 7. And then we take the square root of both sides. So that's x minus 2 equals, anytime we take square root, plus or minus, square root of 7. And then I can't take the square root of 7, or as far as it won't give me a whole number. So we're just going to leave it in radical form. And then we add 2. So x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 7 plus 2. Come over here, not worried about that left-hand side or the right-hand side. Just looking at here, so my first term is 1, so we're good there. So we're going to take 16, divide it by 2, and then square it. So that's 8 squared, which equals 64. So we're going to go ahead, x squared plus 16x. Now we're going to add that 64 to both sides. Plus 64 equals 36 plus 64. And now we factor it. So again, my factor on this side, it's always going to be x. That sign's positive, so it's plus. And then that middle number divided by 2. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. So it'll be 8 right here, squared, equals 36 plus 64 is 100. And now we solve by taking the square root. So that's x plus 8 equals, the square root of 100 would be 10 or negative 10. So we'd say x plus 8 could equal 10, or x plus 8 would equal negative 10. So then we subtract 8, so x would equal 2, or we subtract 8, x equals negative 18. So we're going through it and looking at these ones. Let me do one more. We don't need to do through 6 because it's the same format always. Let me do number 5 for you. So we want to make sure that first term has a 1 in front of it. So it has a 1, so we're good. We don't need to do anything. So then we take this, that middle term, divide it by 2, and then square it. So that's negative 5 squared, which is 25. So that's what we're going to add to each side. So we have x squared minus 10x plus the 25 equals 11 plus 25. So we factor it. It's always that middle term. So it's that negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So x minus 5 squared equals 11 plus 25 is 36. And now since it's squared, we're going to take the square root. The square root of 36 is 6. So we could write as x minus 5 equals 6, or x minus 5 equals negative 6. So remember, here we didn't have a perfect square, so we just left it as a square root. If we do get a perfect square, make sure we put the positive and negative 1. And then we can solve. Add 5, x equals 11, or we add 5, x equals negative 1. So that's how we're solving by completing the square. Isolate, all right, get this first term equal to 1, divide that middle term by 2, and then square it, and then add that to each side. And then we'll factor it, and then take the square root.